Hey guys, welcome back to Assisted Living Investing. It's Brandon Gustafson. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the importance of touring a facility. The last two videos we've been talking about virtual tours and in-person tours. So I just want to go over why it's important to do a tour of a facility and why you should do it. Make sure that it's a part of your underwriting and your due diligence process, why it's important. So like I mentioned, we talked about virtual tours, we talked about in-person tours and their importance and how you set them up the last couple of videos. But this time, we're just going to go over why it's important to have that tour and what you should be trying to get out of that tour as you're going through and looking at the facility. So why is touring a facility important? What makes it so important to do? There are several reasons why it's going to be important. I'm going to run through those today for you so that you can kind of get a feel for why it's important. Number one, the first thing you got to recognize and realize is by law, sellers are required to disclose a lot of the information to you. But sometimes they don't. And it's not because they're trying to hide anything. It's just because they have been at the house for years and they don't recognize, they don't see some of those things that you as a new buyer might be aware of and you might see, or they're really not that big of a deal, but you want to be aware of them. And so you want to make sure that you're doing it for that. Sellers are required to disclose information to you as the buyer. So a lot of the information you're going to be getting from them, you're going to get a lot of information from the home inspection. Some things that you can look at though as you are doing your own tour of the facility is like the quality of life of the residents, staffing patterns, the upkeep of the house. Those are the types of things that you just can't get as you're having conversations. They're not really required too much to disclose those types of things, but it's things that you want to be aware of. You want to make sure that those things are good. We've talked a lot about culture in past videos. You want to make sure that that culture is there so that you have a good foundation on which you can build to then continue and have a successful facility, and you're not having to change a whole reputation. You're not having to do an entire new staffing model. You're not having to bring in all brand new residents. That you can have some kind of a base, a good foundation to start on, and then from there you can start increasing things. You can start changing the staffing model. You can start looking at changing the culture of the facility. But if you start off with a good base, you're going to be in a much better position. So those are a couple of things that you just can't get. They're not things that the seller's necessarily going to disclose. So you want to make sure that you're aware of those and you're seeing them as you're doing your walkthrough of the facility. Another thing that you want to make sure that you're aware of as you're doing the tours, there are just things that you can't get as you're looking at photos or even doing a virtual tour of the facility. And we've talked a lot about these, but it's things like paint and flooring, windows, appliances, maintenance on some of those big things like the HVAC. You want to make sure that you'll be able to see those and see how they're functioning, see how they look. Somebody could take a picture of something, and even that, like even a close-up, just a still photo of that, like is specific to the HVAC unit or something like that. It's so much better to be there in person, get your hands on it, see what it feels like, see how old it actually looks. Is there dust around it, or did they like dust it off really quick before they took the photo? Those types of things you want to be able to see and get a real feel for exactly what it looks like. And also, as I mentioned in the past, the fire suppression system, it's key. You want to make sure that's there. Ask questions about it. Is it functioning? Those are things that are really important that you want to make sure that you're aware of as you're doing that tour. It's just super important to have a good understanding of how things are in the house cosmetically and functionally, to make sure that it's going to be something that you're comfortable with and you're not going to have to go in and spend 20 grand to get things up to date. Unless you're finding something that's what you want to do. You basically want to flip something. In that case, go for it. But if you're looking for something that you can just go in, it's basically turnkey. You want to make sure that you're aware of some of these types of information, the status of some of these things. Another key part of the tours is having FaceTime, whether virtual or in person, with the seller, with the listing agent, with your broker, with staff, with residents. Having FaceTime is something that is going to just help out with that transition It's going to help out with the acquisition. People don't look at you as a complete stranger. Getting that FaceTime is key, and it's not something that you can get just through emails. So starting to develop that relationship. It's really good to have a relationship with that seller as you're going through the process, and maintain that relationship and make sure it's a good one, because you're going to have questions that seller is going to have the answer to. And if you burn that bridge, or you have a really bad experience with them throughout the process where you're purchasing the facility, you're not going to be able to reach out to them. You're just going to have to fumble your way through it. Developing that relationship is key, and getting that FaceTime with them through these tours is going to help you on your journey to purchase the facility. So that's another thing that is really key, developing that relationship, getting that FaceTime, and having conversations together with that person. We touched on this one in the last video. Is it okay to do both a virtual and an in-person tour of a facility? And absolutely. I think it's totally fine to do it. It shows that you're very interested in the facility. There are things that you can capture in a virtual tour that you might not be able to catch when you're doing an in-person tour, because you're sitting back, you're not engrossed in everything. You can see things and you can say, oh, hey, could you go back and look at that? It might feel a little more comfortable to ask people to retrace their steps in a virtual tour situation. Whereas an in-person tour, you're able to actually get there. You can touch things. You can see how it is. You can see exactly how big it is. Get a real feel for things. Doing both of them is something that I would highly suggest if you're able to. We went over reasons why you may or may not in our last video, so make sure you go watch that one for some of that information. But I would highly suggest doing both. It gives you a lot of opportunity to further develop a relationship. You're having multiple conversations. You're showing and expressing a lot of interest by doing both types of tours of the facility, virtual and in person. And also you're able to see things in a different light. You're able to see it at different times of day. You're able to see it in different perspectives. And being able to do that is just a good way of doing extra due diligence to make sure that you're comfortable with the facility that you're purchasing. So definitely try to do both if you can. At the very least, do one of them. Absolutely do one. Is there a reason that you would not do a tour of a facility? We talked about this again in the last video about in-person tours. For me, no. And I think you're probably at the same level as I am, where you're looking at smaller residential facilities. Doing an in-person or a virtual tour is key to the due diligence process in purchasing it. Chances are, if you're looking at these types of facilities, it's probably one of you're a beginner investor. You're beginning and getting into this asset class, and that's fine. And so doing that tour is extremely important. I would highly, highly encourage you to have a tour of the facility as a part of your due diligence process. Are there instances where you may not do it? I would say there probably are, but at the level that you're likely investing in right now, probably not. We talked about this in the last video. If you are looking at buying a big portfolio, there's 10 facilities geographically, they're kind of spread out across the state or even in multiple states. Getting to them just isn't feasible, and spending time doing virtual tours of every single one of those is going to be a headache for you to coordinate with the seller, and the administrator is just going to be a pain. In that instance, maybe you're just doing a couple of them, or you purchase several facilities. You're already kind of aware of some of the inadequacies of those facilities and what they might need. In that instance, maybe you don't do it. But for the most part, I think, yes, you're going to want to make sure that you build that into your timeline, into your due diligence process, that you are doing an in-person or a virtual tour of the facility or both, and making sure that you are comfortable with the facility that you are purchasing. So yeah, absolutely, you want to do it. Very few instances where you're not going to want to do that. If you have questions about that or comments, make sure you comment down below so that we can have that discussion together as a part of the community. Love to hear your perspectives, your experiences doing tours of facilities. Maybe you had a bad experience, maybe you had a good experience. I'd love to hear about those and kind of what happened as you were doing a tour of the facility. The last question is probably, should you walk away from a facility that needs a lot of cosmetic updates? And I would say not necessarily. It might be a really good opportunity for you to have a value add property where you're able to get it for a lot less than it's worth because it needs a lot of paint. It needs some updating in the cabinets. Maybe it's a 30-year-old home and it looks like it's 30 years old and you need to do some updating to it. And you're able to get it for less than it's worth, build into your budget a contingency or a renovation budget, so you can go in and make those cosmetic updates, get it so it's up to date, and now you have like a really good asset because you've done some improvement on the property, but it's also a good thing that you can market. Updated house, updated facility, come check it out. You could do an open house, you can get people in and walking through it. I think it's a really good opportunity for you to do that. If there are things that are structural, maybe you don't want to do that, because you do need to have a higher level of safety in mind as you're dealing with residents and their families and things like that. You want to make sure that it's not, you don't have any big foundation issues, or the roof isn't collapsing. Those types of things you might want to stay away from. But if it's cosmetic and it just needs new paint, maybe new cabinets in the kitchen, you've got to update bathrooms, some plumbing fixtures, things like that, I would say do it. I think that's a great opportunity for you to put some personal touches on there, get it looking really nice, something that you would want your grandparents or your parents to be living in, and go from there. So I would say go for it. If it's something that just needs some cosmetic issues, I don't think you need to be scared of it. I've been looking at a few opportunities personally, and that's what they need, is cosmetic updates. And right now I'm just not in a position where I can buy another one. It'll probably be a couple years before we get there. It's something that we're very strongly considering, because if we spend 10 grand and we're able to update this facility and create some economies of scale for us, then awesome. That's a new facility. We can rebrand it as that. We can start doing walkthroughs and doing open houses and things like that. I think it would be an awesome opportunity. So I would encourage you to very strongly consider things that need those cosmetic updates. Just in recap, facility tours are an extremely important part of your due diligence process. Highly encourage that you take the time to do a virtual or an in-person tour, or both. Make sure that you're doing that as a part of your due diligence process. Make sure you're developing those relationships with the seller, the administrator, staff, residents. Make sure you're getting in there, that you are getting some exposure to exactly what it looks like and how it feels. It's such an important part as you're looking through and considering purchasing a facility. Very, very highly recommend that you do that type of a tour. I'd love to hear your comments down below. I'd love to see kind of what your experience has been. Have you been able to set up in-person virtual tours? What has your experience been? Have you had any just not fun experiences where it's just kind of been, you walk through and it's just like, oh, I can't do this one, or you walk through and it's just like, oh, this is awesome, I'd love to have this. Why are you selling this facility? That's another key thing that I would make sure you're asking sellers. Make sure you're asking why you are selling. They're going to tell you, but make sure that that is something on there. You're having that conversation with them. And it could be that they're just ready to retire. They're ready to move out, life situations. A lot of times that's what you're going to find, and that's totally fine. And you're able to be there, help them solve that problem and help them move on. And then you get to get into the industry, and just, it's so wonderful. I'm so excited for you to start down this path and see where it leads you. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you're reaching out to me on other social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, on the Facebook group. We'd love to have you over there for conversations and help us all learn together. I'd love to hear from you, your experiences, and thanks for watching Assisted Living Investing, and I'll talk to you next time. Have a good one.